Hello there, and this is part 3 of Chapter 12, Perspectives on Environmental Policy. I'm just going to do 2 slides here and keep the time at a decent amount. So, first slide, Market Incentives and the Endangered Species Act. So, the Endangered Species Act was passed in 1973, and the United States Secretary of the Interior, they approved various plants and animals and wildlife and fish for the endangered species list. And they created recovery plans for each species without regard for the cost. So, in a way, was an important thing to do, but it is, in our language of economics, an unfunded liability. Now, when a species is listed, also the Secretary of the Interior must designate areas as protected critical habitat for the species. Private landowners are not compensated when the use of their land is limited by critical habitat legislation. Now, command and control is necessary in this case because there aren't a whole lot of options. You can't incentivize folks to remove critical habitat and pay them for it because you need to maintain the species because by definition it's endangered. Now, speaking of which, it's not just the endangered species we have to concern ourselves with. It is the endangered species and their critical habitat, where the species live. And there could be redwood forest for the spotted owl. It could be, particular desert area for a particular species. So it's one is needed for the other. In a way, endangered species and critical habitat are complements of each other. So you can't just be saving one, you got to save one and the other as well. Now this leads us to landowners. So it's one thing to save the species and the critical habitat, but what about landowners? So as your reality check goes into, without compensation, what are they incentivized to do? Well, they are incentivized, according to your book, to preemptively destroy endangered species in order to avoid the burden of compliance. So, they frequently act to eliminate habitat for fear of losing use of their property. So landowners want to have use of their land. And this is especially in the West. They want to be able to lose their land, and if they're not incentivized to do so, then what is the best way to be able to lose their land? To be able to use their land is to perhaps get rid of the problem. Okay. Now, some congressmen people, I think it was Pumbo and Don Young of Alaska, proposed the Endangered Species Conservation and Management Act. So, ostensibly to remedy problems with poor incentives. This would have compensated landowners whose property value decreased by more than 20% due to protective action. So, some compensation to landowners to comply with the Endangered Species Act. Very interesting. Okay, next thing is going back to mixed approaches to or going to carbon emissions, and a little bit of a practicality here. So, how do China and the United States deal with the issue of carbon emissions? So, just to understand that China and the U.S. are number one and number two largest emitters of CO2 in the world. Question is, they're doing it. What are they doing about it? What are they doing about the social cost of this carbon dioxide? Well, China has been experimenting with market-based approaches within China. These include incentive programs for commuters to find alternatives for private autos, subsidies for methane reduction, and reforestation. and formal training programs in market-based environmentalism. So all that is great, but at the same token, China is also, and this is not necessarily stated in your book, China is exporting coal technology to Southeast Asia. So they're actually subsidizing the production of coal-fired plants in places like Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. As we've learned previously, coal is very cheap to build, and because it's cheap to build, it is it is something that they can do. And apparently, China is very good at building coal-fired power plants because China itself has a tremendous amount of coal. I must say that we in the United States have a lot of coal as well, and we would probably be quite good at exporting coal production technology. Now, the USA has adopted ambitious plans during the Obama term. Obama's 2014 budget proposal cut funding for the EPA by almost 5%, but increased spending in other environmental programs by the same proportion. Obama supported higher CAFE standards, so this was fuel economy standards for vehicles, stricter efficiency standards for home appliances, and a program to tap the waters of the outer continental shelf for electricity from wind, waves, and ocean currents. So there were very ambitious plans there, but unfortunately, Trump came into office in 2016 and systematically tried to upend all of the plans that were under the Obama term. Trump hasn't been entirely successful, but he certainly has been trying. Obama did advocate a economy-wide cap-and-trade program for greenhouse gases, and that was good, but certainly has not been forthcoming in the Trump administration. All right, this is part 3, and we'll have one more part after this.